My guest today is Dame Evelyn Glennie, who, as most people know, is a world famous percussionist. But I'm speaking to her today about a score she has composed for a crime drama called The Code of Silence, in which a deaf waitress with vital lip reading abilities is pulled into an elaborate investigation. So Evelyn, I mean, this is fascinating on so many levels. Of course, I mean, most obviously because it chimes with your own experience of lip reading. And I guess I wanted to start off by asking you to what extent does the subject matter resonate with you? How did the lip reading experience of the protagonist lip ring true with you, basically?
Yes, thank you, Hannah. And I should just make it clear that I co-composed the score
Mhm.
with the wonderful Dan Jones. So
Mhm.
it was a collaborative effort. But yes, I think the whole subject matter of focusing on lip reading was intriguing. There have, of course, been several programs that has focused on a deaf person, and normally that's focusing on what they can or cannot hear. But I think in this instance, it was an opportunity to really delve into the complexities of what is involved in the act of lip reading. And it's very complicated sometimes because you are depending sometimes on the things that you can hear, but also so many visual clues. And those visual clues are not necessarily focused on the lips alone.
Mhm.
It's the whole body language, the face language, the movement of that person, the context of where that person is, but also your own energy levels. You know, when you're tired, it's very, very hard to lip read. You know, you're just simply tired,
Mhm.
or accents can come into play.
Yes,
Um,
gosh, yes, they will, won't they?
yeah, so you're trying to build as much context as possible. So it isn't just what is coming out of that person's mouth and what they're actually forming through the shape of the lips. It's trying to put everything into context as far as possible to give you as many clues as possible as well. So it was a fascinating subject, I think, and I think that the program makers, did a good job to uh, yes, to highlight this way of listening.
Mhm. Yes, yes, and you felt that it really captured something of your own experience of lip reading.
Absolutely. I mean, it's I think the thing with lip reading is that uh, you have to look at someone first of all. So just the sheer energy to look at someone, to face someone, if you want to have that conversation, does take a lot of energy, and so you're, quite able to, I guess, delve into a conversation that matters, or a conversation that you want to be part of, and also to be able to say, or to just walk away, or to say that, you know what, I don't need to be part of that conversation.
Okay,
Again, just to save your own sanity.
resources. Yes, yeah.
Absolutely, exactly that, exactly. And yes, and I think it's also, I find if you're with people a lot, you become so familiar with them and their ways, and the kind of tempo of how they speak, um, and how they might form a sentence, or just how they are, and you're much more clocked into that. But if it's someone whom you haven't met before, then you do a lot more listening than speaking. You are listening in the fullest extent, sussing out how they're moving, and the tempo of their, if they're speaking. And I mean, someone could sort of put their hand to their mouth and be thinking about something and speaking at the same time. Well, at the moment I've got my fingers over my mouth and speaking. Well, that would be just a no-go for someone who has to lip read,
Mm.
or someone with a beard, or someone who just suddenly looks away or looks down and they're continuing to speak. That's not terrifically
It's not going
helpful.
to work, is it? Yeah, it's not going to
So, and
fly.
you have to be very clear as to what you need to function, and be very open with that. And that's then a learning curve for everybody.
Hmm. And does it come with a fear of getting things wrong? I suppose, all of us, when we're speaking to someone, we're always worrying about getting something wrong,
Yes.
And I wonder if that is heightened if you're having to concentrate so fully on, the shapes that their mouth is making and the face and everything else.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. You will get things wrong, or you might misunderstand something, or you might just simply miss something, or you interpret something as being said, and it's something slightly different. And absolutely, that can happen almost on a daily basis. But that's just the way it is. And again, if you need something repeating, you just have to ask for it to be repeated. It's simple as that. And most people will do that. I think the difficulties can come if you're just out about, I don't know, buying a ticket from a train station or going into a shop or I mean, I had an instance just the other week whereby I went into a store and I ordered something that needed to be that would arrive in about 3 weeks' time or something. And they said, "Oh, can I have a phone number?" And I said, "Well, I can give you a number to text because I can't hear on the phone." And so they sort of frowned a little bit and said, "Ooh, okay, but do you have a landline?" And I thought, oh, that's a very interesting response. And I said, well, no, I don't have a landline. And even if I did, that may not help the situation. So anyway, I said, what about email? How about that? And so that was the route we went. But it's just very interesting little things like that that can sometimes take people off guard, and then they may not be quite sure how to react on that. But again, it's a learning curve for everybody.
And this is making me think because I think I read somewhere that you were resistant or reluctant at first to learn sign language. Is
Yes, I
that
was
right?
because I absolutely because in the early days a lot of the newspaper articles and so on were focusing on my deafness, and I really wanted to focus on being a musician and to talk
Mm.
about being a musician, and I was surrounded by people with hearing, and I just felt that I didn't want to talk about my deafness, um,
Yes.
and so therefore I wanted to function as a working musician and making no big fuss and just getting on with playing music and that type of thing. And of course, in hindsight now, I once I began progressing with my journey and realizing, well, what does listening actually mean? And then of course meeting more and more deaf people and more deaf people who are using sign language, and you have a completely different perspective, when you're able to chat with those people, what that language opens up to so many people, and that sign language doesn't only belong to deaf people.
Mm.
Many other people can use sign language for different reasons, and that made me really think a bit, and I thought how narrow-minded I was to perhaps dismiss sign language, in the early years. But that was the choice I made, and so now I'm much more open to integrating myself with deaf people and deaf people who use sign language, and really I have a much better understanding, I think, as regards to the depth of that language and indeed the need for it as well.
I suppose it almost gives you a kind of bilingualism, doesn't it? That you can,
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And I'm all in favor for sign language to be in our schools and to be treated as a language, and for our youngsters to learn to learn sign language. And I think it's a beautiful language to uh, connect with other people who may be dependent on sign language from other cultures, even although the sign language is different, of course, in other places. But there's still this uh, kind of visual. There seems to be, I think, more bridges that can be created through the visual element of sign language when you're dealing with other cultures than perhaps a spoken word. And that can truly be a barrier. If you do not know the spoken language, it can be a huge barrier. But somehow with sign language, there's always a way that can, bridge that gap. even if a sign is completely different, but there's a way through that body movement and the willingness to try to communicate that can be quite powerful.
Yes, yes, I can see that. But I can also see how, as a working musician, you'll be working with people who do not know how to use sign language,
Yes.
and therefore it could be a barrier if you don't know how to lip read in that way.
Absolutely, yes.
You have
But
the option.
interestingly, I feel that, because sign language is such a visual language, and the understanding of how they use space, it's like a conductor in a way. And I just thought, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if conductors knew sign language, and how would that enhance, how they express and use the space and their facial expressions and so on. And of course, the facial expressions in sign language are absolutely crucial.
Mm.
And sometimes when you see a fluent uh, uh, BSL person, you might think, well, they're creating very strange facial expressions, but those expressions are absolutely vital, important, and portray so much information to someone who is dependent on sign language. Um, but in a way, it is like a conductor, because they too, create extraordinary expressions that are all part and parcel of the movement they create with their arms and their hands and their fingertips and all sorts of things that communicate to us musicians.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I suppose there's something in common maybe with sign language and lip reading, in that, as you said, you have to be very sensitive to facial expressions, to body language. Do you think that that gives you maybe a fuller impression of the person you're speaking to than if you were just relying on your ears, say, because
I
you have to be so sensitive to visual cues?
Yes, I actually do believe that.
Mm.
I think that you can pick up on all sorts of clues, even if no language is used. But I guess there's always a language, when you think about, even if you have two people, sitting, appearing to be doing nothing, there's a kind of language there, as sort of paying attention. And I think this is really important for us all to cultivate, and we all have an opportunity to do that. And I think it's especially important, as we perhaps interact with older people, perhaps people with dementia, whereby the spoken word is no longer there, and we might just see someone sitting in a chair. And it's very easy for us to think that they're then quickly become worthless in society. Well, actually, they are still equally important for us to engage with, but we might just engage with them in a slightly different way, or find a different entry point to be part of their lives. So and it's often that visual aspect, the tiny little clues, a little flicker in the eye, or movement, in the face, or a movement in their hands, or the direction of their head, or whatever it might be. Those are important things for us to just uh, be aware of, and to take time to register. So I think that with, lip reading, eh, we you do need space and time, to sort of listen, to look, to listen, but then to register, and then to act, then to respond. So that's it, it's a kind of process that happens there.
It's a process. It might mean that you're more emotionally attuned to the person you're talking to as well. You get a sense of,
Yes,
who is this person? Who is this person sitting in front of
absolutely right.
me?
Yes, indeed. That's so
Yeah.
true. And we all have a story.
We all have a story. Exactly. So bringing this onto the code of silence, I wonder how all of this affected your compositional approach.
Yes, well, it was very interesting. Obviously, you have dialogue with the production team and the producer, the director, and so on. And so Dan and I, we spent a few days here, where there's a large collection of instruments, and we were really thinking about resonance. That was what we were thinking about, because we didn't just want to have a melody that's associated with that character, another melody with that character, and so on. We really wanted to think and try to understand about the space that was required for Alison, the lead character in Code of Silence, when she was observing people. And so we didn't want just a normal kind of melody to cover that moment. We needed a kind of soundscape that sort of went inside of her and that allowed her to connect then with whom she was watching. And so we wanted actually for there to be a lot of space in that there was going to be no sound, i.e., we didn't want any kind of music. We wanted this sort of concentration of silence. However, the whole series had an awful lot of music in the end because, of course, you have to go through various layers of teams from ITV and so on. And of course, to have a series that had very little music was slightly uncomfortable. And so sometimes we were asked to add more music and add more sound and so on. And but we were using all sorts of unusual instruments. So, for example, I used an instrument called an array mbira, which is a huge sort of thumb piano. It's more than a thumb piano. It's just an incredible instrument. And but some of the prongs are so low that you can't actually hear it, but the microphone could pick it up. And I think Dan could just about hear it, but he had to get really close to the instrument, and it's this vibration. But of course, when that sound is manipulated, and this is the magic that Dan and his music editor Simon could do, they could really haul out the kind of unheard sounds of the sounds that were created. So it was quite interesting.
A real
We
emphasis on tactile sound, on texture, on percussive sounds, I guess.
Yes, on texture, certainly, on the kind of texture of the resonance. So it was concentrating on the sound after something had been struck. And that was the patience that Alison needed in order to suss out what was being said. So, of course, when you strike something, that is what you hear, but the resonance is where the concentration starts. So that's the bit that you have to have the patience to live with and to just listen to and to register and to see how that unfolds. And so when Alison was lip reading people from a distance, there's no way that she was hearing those people. She literally needed to see them and needed to see the interaction of those people, the context of those people. Where were they? Were they outside? Were they in a busy street? Were they in a cafe? Were they in a police corridor or on a stairway? And where was she in context to those people? So would it look odd if she was just standing there watching them? Or was she sort of walking up the stairs, but meanwhile also trying to watch, what they were saying as she was actually walking up a stair? Or was she looking at a screen trying to suss out what people were saying? So it was that different kind of intensity as regards to her perspective that we had to musically think about as well.
I see. Okay. So really trying to put the viewer in her shoes,
Yes,
effectively.
absolutely. Yes, indeed. And of course, sometimes she had to make out as though she wasn't lip reading because she didn't want to be sort of a suspect, where people were thinking, well, that's a suspicious lady there, always looking at people, overlooking, i.e., intensely looking. And that can appear odd too. So it was for her to find that balance, and I think musically, we then were able to penetrate the sound quite a bit when she was absolutely focusing, or pulling back on that when she was just sort of, appearing to go about her daily life. But meanwhile, she was picking up information in order to feed back to the police. So yes, it was interesting, and also that sort of soundscape that you had this strong woman in Alison, an independent lady, a young lady, but also quite vulnerable. And when people saw that she was deaf, you know, they thought, oh, poor her, or she won't understand, or, oh, you know, don't worry about her because she won't hear something or whatever. You know, there's this sort of putting in the box type of situation with the character. And this is where, again, the music could become quite strong to show the strength or the independence, you know, or indeed the vulnerability as well. Um,
Yes. Yes, because
so
it is that very peculiar, unique mix, that of strength and vulnerability that you get with,
yes,
with having hearing impairments, because you have to be actually very strong to find solutions and workarounds, don't you? But it is a
absolutely.
fundamental vulnerability.
Yes, and I think with the character, you know, she in the drama, you know, she lived with her mum, who was born deaf and used sign language, did not use her voice, and so there was this kind of uh, balance musically to think, okay, there's a mother who would do absolutely anything for her daughter, so. But at the same time, it was also a very busy household when they communicated because of the ease and fluidity of their sign language and the communication that they used to through sign language. So it was always very busy in the house, even although there was no or very little sound.
Mm,
So, but yet when Alison was with people who heard and all of that sort of thing, it was silent when she was lip reading, you
mm,
know. So it was a kind of interesting
mm,
musical uh, not dilemma, that's the wrong word, but trying to find different entry points as regards to then the viewer as to what they would think about, you know, when they were seeing this and listening to this, and then how would the music score help them
mm.
in their thought process. So it was interesting.
And I'm curious, I want to bring this back to your own life a little as well, because I would like to know how you learnt to lip read. Did you teach yourself? I read somewhere that you were practicing with your mother. How did it, how?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I mean, I think it's something, certainly, you know, my situation where, you know, I would have developed naturally because you are having to do that. And so I think there's a lot of that. But yes, my mum and I, well, on a Sunday morning, there used to be two programs that were devoted to deaf people, really, and focusing on deafness. And one of them was specifically towards lip reading, can you believe? And so after we would watch the program, and then afterwards we would go to a mirror in the living room, and we would literally practice what we experienced from the program. And so we'd both be looking at the mirror, and you know, mum would be saying words, and I would look at her, and then she would say them in different ways. And so sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, sometimes with our face just slightly away, or just slightly down, just little subtle things that we'd picked up from the program. And that was how we worked together. So it was a nice way to kind of have a moment, just the two of us, you
Yes,
know.
I think it's quite a
Uh,
nice mother and daughter moment, isn't it? Yeah.
yes, absolutely. But it was extraordinary that there was a program specifically dedicated, you know, to that type of thing. I think now there might be only one program specifically for deaf people on you know, the main channels. See here, but of course that's covering lots of different topics, and it's you know, it's great that it's still going because that's quite an old series.
Gosh, yes. And was there a lot of frustration also involved in the process, of especially, I guess, if you're practicing in front of the mirror, you can go at a certain pace, but then when you have people who might speak very quickly,
Yes.
yeah.
Of course, absolutely. But of course, in those days, you know, I was wearing hearing aids, and you know, kids are kids, and but you had a good pool of teachers at school who understood your situation, and all sorts of things like that. So I think that support system was absolutely crucial. I think it's more in everyday sort of instances when you go out about, you know, and you're going into shops or into banks or into stations or airports and that type of thing. And you then begin to see if people are trained in working with people with all different kinds of situations. But it's very interesting then to see how people, yeah, how people communicate So even if you say, oh, I need to see you, I'm lip reading, or or I'm deaf or something, it's very interesting to see then how people accommodate that. If they do accommodate that, how comfortable they are with it. You can almost immediately see if there has been training in place for people, just to immediately, okay, this is my situation, so I now need to, yeah, be accommodating here, or if they just simply don't know what to do.
Well, Evelyn, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure to
You're
talk to you.
welcome. Thank you, Hannah. It's lovely to see
Lovely to
you.
have an excuse to talk to you.